everybody, it's Drybear. The First Descendant patch that has the weapon balance in it has gone live, and additionally, the new demo for Season 3 is available on the main menu screen. So as I talked about yesterday, what you're going to want to do is you want to start the demo, play through the demo all the way until the end. It doesn't take very long. It's like 5 to 10 minutes. Complete it, and at the very end, once you finish watching the cutscenes and, you know, done all the dialogue, it will give you a pop-up that says, hey, complete the survey. Do the survey. It's very fast. It's like a minute or two. Get that done, and that'll unlock all of the rewards that you get from the demo. But today, I wanted to talk about all the cool changes that are in the game now. We've got a new skin set. We've got new cosmetics, things like that. We've also got a whole bunch of weapon balance to talk about, and also some quality of life changes as well. Let's start with the weapon rebalance, because this is definitely something a lot of people have been looking for. I will tell you from the outset that it's not really the largest, most comprehensive list of weapon changes that I was hoping for. There are some weapons that benefited greatly from this series of buffs. There's also weapons that got buffs that I don't really know why they decided to buff that stat specifically on that weapon, when the weapon has plenty of other issues that I think could have been solved with some other adjustments. But let's go through all of the weapon balance changes so we know what's in the game right now. Starting with the final masterpiece. So this is the pistol that previously at the start of the game when it launched last year was utter trash. It was complete nonsense. Then they reworked it to have a whole bunch of really interesting passives that trigger in different ways, but it still paled in comparison to many of its counterparts, including the last dagger, which outshines it dramatically. So they made some adjustments with this patch to make the final masterpiece a little bit more interesting, focusing primarily on its passive, like all the triggering effects that you get from it. So you can see that exploding ecstasy damage up from 50% to 160%, restrained dispassion 50% to 145%. You got pulsing shock here 50 to 145. You've got puddle of indulgence damage 3 to 9%, and the poison tick from that damage per second 7% to 21%. So the passive for the final masterpiece has gone up quite dramatically. We'll have to mess around with this to see exactly how it is. Again, because of the way the passive is a little random, you're going to get some varying results on it. But with these changes, it's quite nice to see these come up. Then you'll see a really big theme with a lot of these weapon changes. They focused a lot on the attribute damage on the weapons, as well as the weak point damage on weapons. The weak point buffs are going to be really good for the hand cannons and like the sniper rifles and stuff. But the attribute damage is kind of interesting. I have to wonder if they're doing this attribute damage increase just to try and play into the Axiom Planes. If you didn't know, in the Axiom Planes, what you see on screen right now, this is actually the setup that they have for a lot of the open world encounters in Axiom Planes, and they're very elemental based. You'll see these portals pop up and these eyeballs pop up. When you do elemental damage to a target, they will become resistant to that elemental damage, and I wonder if they're just giving a lot of weapons more attribute damage to try and force that hand and trigger that to happen more often with more weapons that are playing along with it. So a lot of these attribute damage increases you see are going to be the weapons that have their attribute damage on it by default, like they already have chill attack and they already have fire attack, for example. So a lot of these numbers are going up. So for final masterpiece, the attribute damage has been increased from 1000 to 9936. And generally, and you know, I don't want to be like a naysayer, but in general, if you have a game where you're doing 10 times multipliers on buffs, you really need to kind of like spend more time trying to balance the things in the game. There should be nothing that is 10 times far away from where it's supposed to be in balance wise. So some of these are pretty crazy. So you've got 1000 to 10,000 damage on the attribute for final masterpiece. And you've also got weak point damage coming up from 1.5 to 2.11. And again, this is going to be a theme going forward. Next is the Python, everyone's favorite SMG. This has been a powerhouse since the game launched. Very, very strong SMG. And they increased the attribute damage on this slightly. So attribute damage increased 6,600 up to 7,500. So a nominal increase, you know, just over 10%. So you'll be able to get that kind of locked in, which is really cool. Extra damage on that is really good as well. Python is still being used now to dominate. There's a lot of Serena builds that use Python, Glade builds that use Python, Enzo builds that use Python. And it also has that defense shred option as a synergy for your party. So if you want to use it in your party, you definitely get good value out of it. So Python catching a buff here just for attribute. Next up is EXCAVA, the past seasonal weapon. This weapon has not really been the best once it lost its seasonal buff. However, it has one major benefit that other weapons don't have, in that it has a very good weapon core slots. I really wish there was some way in game where we could actually swap out or change our weapon core slots, because I feel like they went through and kind of arbitrarily assigned the core types on all of the weapons, and some of the weapons benefited dramatically. They got really, really good cores. Either they got a bunch of sprint core slots, or they got a whole bunch of firearm attack and crit damage slots or something, whereas there's some weapons that got, like, you know, 2 purples and 2 yellows or something, which means that you can't really modify the damage of the weapon at all. So I feel like they either need to go back and look at the weapons to see if they can improve the weapon cores, or give us a way to change it, because the arbitrary, we just kind of chose which slots went on which weapon, and some weapons benefited more than others. I feel like they definitely could improve on, but at least for the EXCAVA, which does have some very good weapon core slots, they did increase the attribute damage from 9,500 to 12,200. So more attribute damage on the EXCAVA. Next up is a weapon that actually, you know, I was talking to my audience the other day asking, like, hey, what weapons would you guys like to see improved? And a lot of people said Enduring Legacy. Like, even though Enduring Legacy has always been one of the better weapons, it still is used today. There's still people that want it to be a little more in line with weapons like the Last Dagger, or like, you know, your Ascending Armory style Ancient Knight assault rifle that really only Serena can use in most cases. But in this case, Enduring Legacy is getting an increase, or it's getting an addition of fire attack. So it now has a flat fire attack of 6,500, which makes a lot of sense. It does seem kind of like a fire weapon. And then it also has its weak point increase from 1 to 1.85. And I think this is actually even more important. There are a lot of weapons in the game right now that have a a 0.1 multi-hit damage, or like a 0.05 crit damage, where they have like a basic 1x scaler on weak point damage, which basically nullifies that stat. It makes it so that stat is completely useless. It's not worth building. It's not a viable path for that weapon at all. There's tons of weapons in the game right now that have those kind of odd breakpoints that I was hoping that they would get through some of them, and I feel like this is definitely one of them. So the 1 weak point on Enduring Legacy coming up to 1.85 means that you can mix elemental damage, potentially even with weapon cores. I forget which cores are on the Enduring Legacy, but now we can also get scaling on weak point damage, which is really cool. There's also a new component set that adds weak point damage in the new Season 3 update that we'll be able to take advantage of, so more weak points on these is going to be kind of nice. Then we've got the Thunder Cage, the most popular weapon by far in Season 0, overpowered at the time, but has been since power crept into oblivion. Like, you know, everyone ran Thunder Cage. It was the go-to weapon with the go-to item with the go-to value, but then just ever since then has just been power crept over and over and over, and has kind of fallen behind. So what they've done is additional damage from the unique ability, the explosion when you kill an enemy, has been increased from 200% to 400%, a massive doubling of the explosion damage of Thunder Kage's passive. Now, the big thing about Thunder Cage is the explosive ability on the passive is not really the biggest AoE, but instead of increasing the AoE size, they just double the damage, which is actually really cool. And keep in mind that I believe the last time I tested Thunder Cage, the explosion damage is based on the hit that killed the enemy that triggered the explosion, which means that, you know, things like weak point, things like crit damage scaling, those will affect the damage of the explosion as well. So when you have, you know, more additives, more multiplicatives on the damage output, when you double the core scaling of the explosion, those things will compound, right? So the fact that you can get a headshot and crit, which makes the explosion better, assuming I'm remembering that correctly, then you'll get even more damage out of it as well. And the next change that they made, which is one that I thought they were going to make, so when they did, you know, this is a couple patches ago, they added in elemental damage to weapons that seemed like they were already elemental. It was mind-boggling to me and everyone in the community that the Thunder Cage that explodes and does electric damage to everyone in an area wasn't one of the electric weapons in the game. Like it just didn't catch one of those, which is super weird. But it has it now. So they added in an attribute damage of electric attack to the Thunder Cage. So not only is it getting more elemental damage on it in the core game, it is also getting a bigger explosion on the passive as well. So all of that is very good news for Thunder Cage. Next up is the Forgotten Hope. I mean, the Fallen Hope. This weapon has pretty much always been horrible. From its launch of the game until now, it has pretty much always been horrible. Even the one character, Freyna, Serena, who has a lot of synergy with the weapon, because the weapon does more if you're targeting a target that is already poisoned. So you would want to poison them first and then get value by shooting them with Fallen Hope. It's just always been the damage is really low, the DPS of the weapon is really low, the passive is really low, and on top of it being really low, it doesn't even trigger all the time, which means the uptime and throughput is really low. So the weapon has just been bad all around. So what did they do with it in this patch? They changed the unique ability to over double the damage on it. So on hit, enemy inflicted with poison, firearm attack instead from 30% goes up to 65%. Again, some of these buffs in scale are ridiculous. The fact that these items have existed in the game for a year now, and they've been in a state that's been so horrible, they necessitate 2 to 10 times buffs. A year later is kind of wild, but I'm glad that they're getting it. So firearm attack, 30 to 65% on the Fallen Hope. Attribute damage on the Fallen Hope from 4,700 to 12,429. A lot of this will come into like what weapon cores work on the weapon and whether or not you want to go with poison damage or even just like elemental damage in general. But this makes Fallen Hope at least a little bit more interesting, especially for characters that can already poison the target. So if you can poison the target without having to shoot the target first to trigger poison, you get a little bit more value out of Fallen Hope because it's only when the target is poisoned, but this is kind of a nice change for Fallen Hope. Up next is Divine Punishment, historically one of the worst weapons in the game. I mean, honestly, in general, assault rifles have struggled for a very long time, and I think this is a lot of people were hoping, myself included, that we would get an update to Ancient Knight, because Ancient Knight, like the old Eternal Willpower, the purple weapon, which you can't core purple weapons, which invalidates pretty much every weapon that isn't of the ultimate rarity. So once we lost Eternal Willpower, we pretty much only have out, you know, the Ancient Knight, but the Ancient Knight requires you to maintain aerial status for long periods of time, which pretty much only Serena can do right now. So kind of hoping for that. So for Divine Punishment, it has been a weapon that has just been really bad, even for the characters that excel with it. Any characters that can buff like Luna or like Eugen still don't use it because it's just so freaking weak. So what did they change on it to make it better? The attack up of the unique ability Glory has been increased from 0.7 to 1.4, so doubled the value on that one. So if you do trigger the bonus on Glory, you'll get more value out of that, which is really cool. They also changed the attribute damage on it from 6,900 to 9,000, a pretty decent increase there. And then weak point damage, which is at a base of 1, which is nothing, went up to 1.56. So they went and found some of the weak point weapons that are just there. Again, this probably could just be because of the new component set coming in Season 3 that focus on firearm weak points to trigger ricochets. They probably are just trying to get some of the weapons to be in line with that. But Divine Punishment getting a nice buff here. I don't think this is going to make Divine Punishment meta in it by any means. Divine Punishment still needs more, but it is nice to see that at least it is getting some attention. Up next is the Albion Cavalry Gun, a weapon that's used a lot, actually. It's not quite as popular as Malevolent, the Battle Pass weapon, but it does get used a lot, especially like by Haley players or anyone that can run really high crit rate. Albion Cavalry Gun has been a room clearer. Like ever since they added the ricochet to the shot, it has become very, very popular in many cases, and some could even argue that it is currently one of the meta weapons that you use in general. So kind of shocking that it's getting a buff here in general, but the unique abilities have been increased. The firearm crit rate on a hit of an enemy inflicted with mark is up by 3%, a very small increase there, but the ricochet damage went up from 32% to 39%. So they're trying to make it so that, you know, it's a little bit more competitive maybe with like Restored Relic or Malevolent for clearing rooms. So having that extra ricochet damage is quite nice, and they also increased the attribute damage. Again, I wouldn't argue that Albion Cavalry Gun was on the top of my list for needing a buff, but it got one, and it is a little bit stronger than it was before. So if you currently aren't using Albion Cavalry Gun, maybe this is your sign to start. Up next is Secret Garden, which actually has been one of the best weapons in the game since launch. Secret Garden actually had one of the highest DPS throughputs just by basic weapon since the launch of the game. However, an interesting situation has happened with Secret Garden. Secret Garden is in this really odd spot that it's like almost like a really strong DPS weapon. Like if you build it for DPS and you core it that way, it is still extremely powerful as a damage throughput option. However, Secret Garden has kind of turned into a bit of a peacemaker for a lot of people. And what I mean by that is that they use it as a stat stick because it has the extra tech scaling damage when you're using your abilities. So like Inez and Freyna will use it just for their extra ability damage. And because they're using it for ability damage, they're not using it for weapon damage. A lot of people will end up just putting like grapple cores and and like sprint speed cores on it. So Secret Garden has kind of become a bit of a stat stick for a lot of people, and maybe they're trying to turn that around with this change here. Weak point damage on Secret Garden went up 1.5 to 1.77, giving you more weak point damage, which is great. Up next is Kingsguard Lance, basically a handheld portable Jaber. If you took Jaber and you just like put him in a trash compactor and you smashed him into his essential materials and then you made a beam rifle out of him, that's what we would get with King's Jaber Lance. So that's what we have here. It is definitely not the best weapon in the game, but it does get used by a lot of builds. There are some weapon builds that will use Kingsguard Lance to pile up damage on a single target. Even there are some builds that can do like 30-second Ice Maidens using the Kingsguard Lance. That's also really good for just point defense if you're playing a character that doesn't have a lot of good point defense. So you put it up when you're doing like a defense mission or a stand in the circle kind of mission, really strong there. So the unique ability for the Kingsguard Lance went from damage 14.1% to 40.5%. Now keep in mind, again, as I just mentioned, there are some character builds and some weapon builds and some weapon platform builds that use the Kingsguard Lance to get a 30-second clear time on the Abyss Ice Maiden right now. So what does that mean if the Guardian Lance damage goes from 14.1 to 40.5%? That's going to make that even stronger, which is pretty crazy. And it also was one of the Nothing Burger weak point weapons, so it went from 1x scalar on weak point to 1.25, getting a little bit more. Though granted, you're not really going to be shooting enemies with the Kingsguard Lance. You're just going to be shooting your little Jaber turrets to keep them alive and moving, as the damage throughput on the Kingsguard is not great. You're really just using it for the unique ability. Next, we've got Clairvoyance. Historically, this has been one of the biggest letdown weapons in general. It was one that, because it shreds chill resistance on the enemy, a lot of like Viesa players use it just to be able to do extra damage, and even some Haley players, if they're doing weapons platform build, they can they end up using that there. But the damage throughput is really low, and the requirement for doing the chill shred is pretty challenging and kind of annoying. So it's kind of just been a weak choice for a lot of choices, even with like I really feel like they need to buff Frostwatcher or make it a little bit more usable. The range requirement is kind of weird. So I feel like just like as a stat stick for chill users, like Viesa and Haley, if they're doing that, there isn't really a lot of like slam dunk options. You use Clairvoyance or Frostwatcher, yada yada. So they're making a change to Clairvoyance. They're increasing the attribute damage from 2,500 to 13,300, a massive increase, like what, over 5x multiplier on that one there. Crazy damage increase on the elemental damage. And then the weak point, because it had a Nothing Burger weak point, it now goes from 1 to 1.45. So there probably is going to be some more value there. However, again, I have to look at the cores for Clairvoyance. It could be that the new like the core choices for Clairvoyance with a 13.3 flat value of elemental damage, you could probably scale that to the moon. And then if you do targets that are weak to chill, which, you know, you could do like Void Erosion Purge 10, that certainly could work. You could probably get some pretty crazy single target elemental damage out of Clairvoyance with a little bit of scaling on the weak point there that we didn't have before. So kind of interesting and worth exploring. Next up is Voltia. Fun fact, Voltia is actually Bunny's last name. So Bunny Voltia is her name. So this is kind of like her family heirloom beam rifle. This one does RK skill damage to shields. Attribute damage is increased from 2,600 to 7,600. Big increase there. Weak point damage went up slightly from the baseline Nothing Burger from 1 to 1.19, and then the multi-hit damage went from 0.29 to 0.63. I don't know if there's anyone in the comments below that can confirm this, because I haven't tested the Voltia since it came out for Void Vessels, but I'm wondering if the multi-hit can trigger off of the bounce. I know it doesn't on weapons like Malevolent that chain lightning to other targets, but if it could multi off the bounce, this could be interesting. If it can't, it probably isn't too much of a major change for the Voltia. You might be able to get some value out of it, though I'm sure the attribute damage would be nice for the chain lightning that it does anyways, but it is kind of interesting and worth exploring here as well. It's already a really good weapon that's used for breaking RK shields and void shields, but having these buffs here kind of makes it at least a little bit more interesting. Next is Nazeistra's Devotion, a hand cannon that has always been extremely good. Very high weak point damage, very high crit damage, very powerful. Nazeistra's Devotion has always been good, and it's just been getting better over time. However, this time around, it got a ridiculous buff. This is actually nuts, and it could be that certain Descendant weapon builds can make this weapon sing like a canary. Like, this is actually crazy. So attribute damage has been added to the weapon and now has 19,000 toxic elemental attack by default on the weapon, and the weak point damage has been increased from 1.7 to 5.19. That's right, a 5x base multiplier on weak point damage for this weapon. That is, whoa, crazy. And you add on to crit damage scaling out of that, weapon core damage scaling, firearm attack on top of it. This weapon was already very good and is now dangerously strong. And I'm very curious to see how this ends up playing out. Nazeistra is definitely worth checking out. This one could be one of the best weapons. This could very easily become a meta weapon after this change. The other hand cannon, Perforator, which did get reworked to have a little bit of a Greg's reversed fate kind of AoE to it, got a similar treatment here. So damage to the unique passive, the explosive scanner from Perforator has gone up from 35 to 65%, so almost a double there. Weak point damage increased from 2.25 to 5.5. So the weak point damage on this one is actually higher than the weak point that we got on Nazeistra's Devotion, while still having an AoE element, which is incredibly powerful. Again, you could probably see some weapons platform builds now running the new Perforator with decent AoE, but crazy single target damage. So we'll just have to see. And also, this does have an impact on the old Haley build that uses Perforator. To be honest, Haley in general just has been crazy power crept for single target. She's decent, but she's no Serena for that in general. So we'll just have to see kind of how that goes, but big increases here for Perforator as well. Next up is the Peacemaker. In a very similar situation to Secret Garden, Peacemaker is a weapon that has become a stat stick for a lot of people because it has that unique ability where you can stack up and add non-attribute damage to your character, and it ends up being used as a skill Descendants weapon that they use just for sprint speed, grappling hook time, and then stacking up their skill damage instead. But it is getting the hand cannon treatment that the other two got. Weak point damage has gone up from 1.2 to 4.86. To be honest, I don't think anyone really uses the Peacemaker for single target damage. I'd be surprised if anyone even shoots the Peacemaker most of the time. The Peacemaker does actually do decent damage, especially if you do like infinite ammo, like payout or whatever it's called. You can load that up and you can do like the fan the hammer kind of build. It does decent damage. It's actually quite respectable, but again, everyone uses it as a skill-based stat stick that it is now getting a weak point increase. Next is the Wave of Light, a single target weapon that I used for the longest time. It recently got power crept by a few of the other weapons and builds, but it's still very strong because it can guarantee critical strike, which means you can run only critical damage on it instead of crit chance because you don't need to, and you can scale up some really high damage on it. But it is getting buffed. Firearm attack on enemy affected by your lunar halo has increased from 10% to 20%. So when they have that dome on them, which is really the only time you should be using it, like you need to reload, fire until Wave of Light passive is gone, then reload immediately again, even if you have rounds left. So you're always, if you're using this, you should always be getting the firearm attack from it. Then the attribute damage has gone up slightly by about 4,700 or so there. And then the weak point damage went up as well, 1.8 to 2.32. So the firearm attack, the attribute damage, and the weak point together does make Wave of Light a little bit more viable. It was already very viable and quite strong. Now it's just going to be slightly stronger than it was before. The Blue Beetle, attribute damage increased by 15,000 to 26,800. So a massive increase there, 11,000 extra attribute on it. And then the weak point damage went from 1.5 to 3.93. Again, Blue Beetle kind of in that stat stick category. Not really, it still does decent damage, but there are a lot of, like fusion style builds or whatever that like to use the Blue Beetle just to get skill crit and nothing else. We finally land on the Frostwatcher, and to be honest, I'm kind of disappointed with the change here. The one thing I really wanted them to change about the Frostwatcher is that awkward, super weird, just kind of cringe requirement that you have to be a certain distance away from enemies, and then you have to also hit a weak point in order to get the self buff. If you compare all of the weapons that have self buffs for the skill Descendants, Peacemaker, Secret Garden, Blue Beetle, all of these weapons, they don't have this really weird long list of requirements you have to meet in order to get the buff, but Frostwatcher does for some awkward reason. I was really hoping they were going to remove that and then, make Frostwatcher closer to the other skill Descendant weapons that actually allow you to buff yourself consistently, but they did not do that here. They just looked at the stats. So Frostwatcher, attribute damage, 16,000, 22,000, a nice damage increase there, and weak point damage, 1.5 to 2.81. So more weak point damage, more attribute damage, more damage on the Frostwatcher. Again, most people are using the Frostwatcher just to buff Chill Descendants anyways, but a little bit more damage does have a nice positive effect. Lastly are the sniper rifles as an option here. So Afterglow Sword, weak point damage going up from 1.8 to 2.76. This is actually amazing because I think, you know, a lot of what's happening here, especially with Serena. Serena came out and broke the entire game. Weapon Cores came out and broke the entire game. And since then, the original idea of the game being a shooter where sniper rifles do lots of damage, but they're hard to use up close. And, you know, hand cannons are good at single target because they hit weak points. Like that kind of stuff went out the window a long time ago, but it seems like they're trying to rectify that a little bit here. So Afterglow Sword, weak point damage base going from 1.8 to 2.76 is a nice increase. Again, this will, you know, affect like Sniper Sharon builds with Overcharge Edge. It will affect Haley builds if they want to use Piercing Light or they want to use Afterglow Sword, but it is a nice increase for sniper rifles, and sniper rifles really should be doing crazy single target damage if you hit the right weak point. If you have pinpoint accuracy, that's what snipers do. Then they did the same thing with Piercing Light. Weak point damage went from 2 to 2.75. So again, for the old Haley build, if you're still using that, it will be a nice increase there for extra damage, as half of her Zenith damage is firearm attack as well. So some extra damage there as well. And if you're running, you know, again, the Sharon Overcharged Edge Sniper, or really any of the sniper builds, there's not too many of them, but there are a couple, you'll get a little more damage out of the Piercing Light now if you're hitting weak point, and you should be anyways. Next, for some content quality of life improvements, they reduced the crafting cost of crafting cores. So just kind of lowered it, basically cut everything around in half, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on what you're looking at. But yeah, the gold cost of crafting cores has gone down. Again, they've kind of been pretty good about this, how, you know, when old content becomes deprecated, they try to make it a little bit easier so it's not as time consuming. You could definitely make an argument that TFT probably needs more things to do in it in general. It's definitely not, you know, filled to the brim with nonstop content, but having this as an option for some quality of life, I think is really good. So some reduction in the weapon cores. Descendants purchase tickets from the purchase ticket selection box obtained from the event shop can now be dismantled. You can exchange them with tokens through sell blueprints at ETA 0, just so they don't linger and sit around your inventory. They can be sold in the shop, but cannot be dismantled. The dismantling feature will end along with the anniversary gift workshop event. So this is a temporary thing. If you have extra Descendant purchase tickets that you don't want to use or don't plan to use, dismantle them or sell them now, because it looks like this is not going to be around forever. UI UX improved the UI to show first clear rewards before requiring rewards in Void Erosion Purge Challenge. They added a sell complete in the event shop when purchase limit has been reached. Half the items have it, half the items don't, so it's kind of just like a bug, I guess. It's just nice to know when you can't buy anymore. Added default stickers to the photo mode, so you don't have to buy them or get them in the shop to have any stickers at all, which is good. They added description text for frames and stickers in the photo mode, and improved description text in the external component core screen. They changed the notification message for party members when the party leader modifies recruitment conditions, so they just know that, hey, the party member just updated the party, just changed the details on it. There's a nice little change there. They also added support for DLSS 4 multi-frame option for anything of the 5 series on the new GeForce RTX graphics card. So if you've been wanting to use DLSS 4, it is now available in game. Then they did a bunch of bug fixes where they can scroll through here just so you can see them. So some various UI fixes, battle pass screen, some of the previews for skins where you can like preview with, you know, preview in a mode and then switch to a new menu and then it breaks the mode and you can glide around. They address some of that, probably not all of it though. Deceive scans and different cosmetics and store options and UI things have all been addressed and fixed in this patch. And lastly, of course, we've got new cosmetics coming into game, the new rabbit game. These always remind me of like the Final Fantasy Golden Saucer Bunny Girls or whatever. It's kind of what it is. But this time they didn't do a universal skin, kind of like some of the other universals they've done. They've actually done more of like the swimsuit treatment, which is they have a theme and then they run through all the female characters and make variations of that theme. So this is what we've got going on here. This first one is Viessa, then you've got Bunny, then you've got Freyna, then you've got this girl, Glay, I could have swore is Glay, then you got best girl Sharon, you've got best girl Valby, you've got Luna here, of course, then you've got Haley rocking it out, and you've got this is Inez, and then lastly you you have Serena. So the same skin, just different variants. You can see like the tights are different. In some cases, they have like, I don't know, like Freyna style fishnets or no tights at all. The shoes are different. The accessories are different. The ears are different. The hair is different. But it is all one theme from that standpoint. Then they have this Rabbit Dance mode that comes with the bundle, and I think you can buy it separately as well. This is the animation that the directors were doing on the last stream. So if you wanted to do this, and this is infinite, so you can kind of cycle this emote if you want. And you also have this advanced acrobatics. So they've just kind of developed this system of like renaming things to whatever they want. So it's not jiggle physics, it's dynamic motion. And it's not strip pole dancing, it's advanced acrobatics. So here you can stress test your dynamic motion with your very elegant advanced acrobatics if you want to. Now I'll close this out by saying that you definitely want to go ahead and do the demo. It's very fast, it's very easy. You can do the demo in like 10 minutes, do the survey in like 2 minutes, and then you get a whole bunch of rewards from this, which is pretty cool. So as long as you play the demo, you'll get Catalyst, Spoils Box, a bunch of boosts. As long as you finish the demo, you'll be able to get even more items with titles and things like that. And as long as you do the survey, you'll even get a catalyst and stuff like that as well. So I just recommend that you do this very quickly and easily, just to kind of get a sense for what the game is like. You can try out Nell, you can try out Axiom Plains, yada yada. And that's what we got for the patch notes. Mostly weapons, but some other things coming online as well as the demo. So let me know what you think about all this stuff, including the demo and the changes for the weapons, down below in the comments. If you found value in today's video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and don't forget to check out my other channels for other content and other stuff and other things.